Hi Guy, welcome back TV spoilers. The disappearance of Dominic was not an isolated moment of horror, but the culmination of a series of fractures that had been quietly forming beneath the surface of Abby and Devon's carefully maintained sense of control. Dominic, the child born of love, compromise, and emotional complexity, became the center of a crisis that exposed every unresolved fear, every buried resentment, and every unspoken doubt between the two people who shared responsibility for his life. What should have been an ordinary moment in a public park turned into a nightmare that shattered their reality and redefined the meaning of safety, trust, and blame. When news broke that Dominic had vanished, panic did not arrive gently. It struck Abby and Mariah with immediate, paralyzing force. For Abby, the terror was primal and absolute, the kind of fear that stripped away logic and left only the raw instinct of a mother who could not locate her child. Every second without Dominic became unbearable, each unanswered question amplifying the sense that something irreversibly wrong had occurred. Mariah, already emotionally fragile, was overwhelmed by a wave of guilt and confusion that she could not articulate, even to herself. The atmosphere thickened with dread long before the truth emerged, as if everyone involved sensed that this was not a simple disappearance, but the manifestation of something far darker. The revelation that Mariah herself was responsible for Dominic's abduction reframed the entire tragedy into something far more complex and devastating. Mariah was not acting out of malice or greed, but from a place of profound psychological collapse. Her ongoing mental health crisis, intensified by her obsessive fixation on Ian Ward, had eroded her grasp on reality. The lines between protection, possession, and delusion blurred until she convinced herself that taking Dominic was not an act of harm, but one of necessity. This knowledge did nothing to soften the pain for Abby or Devon. Instead, it deepened it, transforming shock into a suffocating mixture of anger, betrayal, and helplessness. The timing of the abduction only intensified the cruelty of the situation. Although Mariah's actions were set to unfold on Friday, January 22nd, Abby and Devon would not realize Dominic was missing until the following week. Those lost days became an invisible wound, one that haunted every subsequent decision they made. The knowledge that time had been stolen from them, that precious hours had slipped away while Dominic was already gone, became a source of relentless self-reproach. Each moment they replayed in their minds felt like a failure, each assumption a mistake that now carried unbearable weight. As the search for Dominic began, Abby and Devon were forced into constant proximity, united by desperation but divided by unresolved tensions. Their co-parenting relationship, already complicated by Dominic's unconventional conception through surrogacy, and Devon's role as sperm donor, began to buckle under the strain. The very foundation of their agreement, mutual respect, shared responsibility, and emotional clarity started to erode as fear replaced patience and panic replaced empathy. Under the crushing pressure of uncertainty, Abby's fear transformed into accusation. She became convinced that Devon had failed in his duty to protect their son. In her mind, there had been small, unsettling moments that should have prompted greater caution. She believed Devon had been too trusting, too dismissive of Mariah's instability, and too willing to assume that love alone could compensate for psychological fragility. Abby's anger was not simply directed at Devon's actions, but at what she perceived as his refusal to acknowledge danger until it was too late. Devon, equally devastated by Dominic's disappearance, refused to shoulder blame alone. He saw Abby's accusations as a painful rewriting of history, one that ignored her own role in fostering Mariah's closeness to Dominic. Devon believed Abby had been emotionally invested in Mariah from the very beginning, blinded by loyalty and affection that prevented her from recognizing the severity of Mariah's mental health decline. To Devon, Abby's outrage felt selective, a way to externalize her guilt rather than confront the possibility that they had both missed something crucial. The conflict between them escalated quickly, not because either wanted to fight, but because neither could afford to be wrong. Each accusation became a defense mechanism, a desperate attempt to survive the crushing sense of responsibility that threatened to consume them. Abby and Devon were no longer just parents searching for their child. They were two individuals locked in a psychological struggle over culpability, control, and moral failure. The more they argued, the clearer it became that their anger was rooted in fear for that they had failed Dominic in ways that could never be undone. As hours turned into days, the emotional toll became impossible to ignore. The relentless uncertainty surrounding Dominic's whereabouts magnified every insecurity. In their relationship, moments that once symbolized cooperation now felt fragile and conditional. Every decision was second-guessed, every silence interpreted as judgment. The shared goal of finding Dominic remained intact, but the emotional unity required to sustain that goal was steadily disintegrating. Both Abby and Devon were painfully aware that their cycle of blame was becoming destructive. Beneath the accusations lay a mutual recognition that desperation was driving them into a spiral, with no clear exit, yet acknowledging that truth did not make it easier to stop. The fear of losing Dominic overshadowed everything else, leaving little room for compassion or introspection. Each believed that if they stopped fighting, the full weight of their helplessness would collapse in on them. The absence of Dominic became more than a physical loss. It evolved into a psychological presence that haunted every thought and conversation. His disappearance exposed the fragile illusion of control they had built around their lives. No amount of wealth, influence, or preparation could protect them from the reality that something precious had slipped through their fingers. The knowledge that Mariah, someone they trusted and loved, was at the center of this crisis made the betrayal feel deeply personal and impossible to rationalize. As the search intensified, Abby and Devon stood at a crossroads. They could either find a way to confront their shared responsibility and rebuild their fractured partnership, or allow their mutual resentment to permanently destroy the fragile balance they had created for Dominic's sake. The tension between them remained unresolved, hanging heavy in the air, as each quietly wondered whether their relationship as co-parents could survive, even if their son was brought home safely. And just as they began to grasp the depth of the damage already done, an unsettling realization emerged on that neither was ready to face. The longer Dominic remained missing, the more it became clear that finding him might not be the end of their nightmare, but the beginning of an even more devastating reckoning, one that would force them to confront not only what Mariah had done, but what they themselves were willing to sacrifice when the truth finally came to light. The decision Abby and Devon made to search for Dominic on their own did not come from confidence or courage, but from desperation so complete that it erased every rational alternative. By the time they chose to act, trust in institutions had already collapsed under the weight of fear. The police felt too slow, family intervention felt too distant, and every minute that passed without Dominic felt like an irreversible theft. In that emotional vacuum, Abby and Devon convinced themselves that only they could save their son, even if doing so meant stepping into danger they were not prepared to face. There was something almost unsettling about how quickly they aligned on this choice. Just days earlier, they had been locked in cycles of accusation and resentment, their co-parenting relationship fraying under the strain of guilt and blame. Yet Dominic's absence reshaped their priorities with brutal clarity. Fear became the great equalizer. Whatever anger remained between them was buried beneath a more primitive instinct, the need to reclaim what had been taken. In moments like these, human beings do not act out of logic, they act out of terror. And terror has a way of making reckless decisions feel inevitable. The search began not with certainty but with fragments, half-formed suspicions, inconsistencies and timelines, subtle details that only parents obsessed with their child would notice. Abby clung to every irregularity as if it were a lifeline, while Devon forced himself to think methodically, even as panic threatened to fracture his composure. Together, they followed threads so thin they could easily snap, knowing that turning back was no longer an option. Each step forward carried the unspoken understanding that they were moving further away from safety and deeper into a world they did not belong to. What they uncovered was not a clear path, but a shadowed undercurrent of danger. The clues pointed away from familiarity and toward isolation, toward places deliberately hidden from ordinary life. There was something deeply unsettling about realizing that Dominic had been pulled into a space defined by secrecy and control. As a viewer, it is impossible not to feel the claustrophobia of that realization. The world Abby and Devon were entering did not operate on rules of morality or empathy. It was a world where leverage mattered more than innocence, and where a child could be reduced to a bargaining tool without hesitation. The journey led them to a remote location that felt disconnected from time and consequence, a place where help would not arrive quickly, if at all. The silence there was not peaceful, it was predatory. Abby felt it immediately. That instinctive sense of wrongness that mothers often describe but can never fully explain. Devon, too, recognized the danger, though he masked it behind controlled focus. In that moment, they were no longer simply parents searching for their son. They were intruders in hostile territory, painfully aware that any misstep could cost them everything. The figures they encountered there were not monsters in the dramatic sense, but something more frightening, ordinary people stripped of empathy. Their presence carried a quiet threat, the kind that does not need to announce itself. Dominic was being held not out of emotion but out of calculation. and that made the situation infinitely more volatile. Abby's fear reached a breaking point. The maternal instinct to protect overwhelmed her sense of self-preservation, while Devon found himself calculating risks he had never imagined he would willingly take. It is here that the story becomes truly devastating, because one of them is forced to make a decision no parent should ever have to contemplate. In order to save Dominic, either Abby or Devon must place themselves directly in harm's way, offering vulnerability in exchange for their child's life. This is not heroism in the traditional sense. It is sacrifice born of love so consuming that death feels negotiable. Watching this unfold, one cannot help but feel the cruelty of the universe they inhabit. A universe that demands proof of devotion in the most brutal currency possible. The confrontation that follows is tense not because of action alone, but because of the emotional stakes that suffocate every movement. Time seems to stretch and contract unpredictably. The danger is not abstract, it is immediate, physical, and terrifyingly real. One wrong decision, one surge of panic, could end everything. Abby's terror manifests as raw determination, while Devon's manifests as grim resolve. Both are driven by the same truth: losing Dominic is not survivable. When the struggle reaches its peak, the line between survival and loss becomes painfully thin. One of them comes frighteningly close to paying the ultimate price. In those moments, it becomes clear that saving Dominic will not come without consequence. Even victory, if it comes, will be incomplete. The human body can endure incredible strain, but the mind records everything. Trauma does not disappear simply because the crisis ends. Against all odds, they manage to free Dominic. The relief that follows is not explosive or triumphant, it is fragile, almost disorienting. Holding him again does not erase what has happened. It only confirms how close they came to never doing so. Dominic is alive, but the experience has already begun to carve itself into his future, into the way he will one day understand safety and trust. Abby and Devon feel this instinctively, even if they cannot yet articulate it. Physically, the damage is visible. Injuries serve as tangible reminders of how far they were pushed. Psychologically, the wounds are deeper and far less manageable. Abby's fear does not dissolve with rescue, it transforms into hypervigilance. A constant awareness that the world is capable of taking her child without warning. Devon carries a different burden, one rooted in the knowledge that he was willing to gamble his own life, and still wonders whether it would have been enough. In the aftermath, something fundamental shifts between Abby and Devon. The shared trauma binds them in ways arguments never could. They have seen each other at the edge of collapse, stripped of pride and certainty. That bond is real and unbreakable, but it is not purely comforting. It is forged in fear, and fear leaves a residue. Their connection is stronger, yet heavier, charged with memories neither can fully escape. As a viewer, I find this arc profoundly unsettling because it refuses to offer clean resolution. Dominic is rescued, yes, but the cost lingers in every glance, every silence. The story does not pretend that love alone is enough to undo trauma. Instead, it acknowledges a harsher truth. Some experiences permanently alter the emotional landscape of a family. Abby, Devon, and Dominic move forward together, but not unchanged. And perhaps that is the most haunting part of this journey. The danger did not end with Dominic's rescue. It merely shifted shape. What Abby and Devon do next, how they live with what they have endured, and whether this shared ordeal ultimately heals or fractures them further remains uncertain. Because in Genoa City, survival is never the end of the story, it is only the beginning of consequences no one is ever fully prepared to face. On our TV Spoilers channel, I always seek content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting perspectives. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.